All right, welcome back. Welcome back to our Extra AI podcast, where I have uh, conversations with guests across the globe on the topics of how AI is being used across these different domains and different uh, industries. And today is one such discussion I'm going to have with Mr. John Willis on the concept, on the context of the hidden operating system of AI-driven engineering. I think that is the crux of our conversation today. And welcome on board, John.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
So, just a quick background about John. I have got some little background. John is a widely respected voice in the DevOps and the cloud engineering world. He's known for his work on modern infrastructure, operational systems, and the evolution of software delivery practices. John has spent decades helping enterprises rethink how they build, how they operate, and scale systems from early infrastructure automation to the DevOps moment, and how the emerging intersection of AI, observability, and operational intelligence. So I'm glad to have you on our podcast, John. So welcome on board again.
Yeah, thank you, Raghu. Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, no, it's been, I sort of start calculating. The joke I make is, when you're younger, you round up your years of experience. So as you get older, you start rounding down. So I'll say, wink, wink, 40 years in this business. But yeah, 5 decades of technology swings has been pretty amazing. And I think part of I think two things attribute to, my sort of travels is one is I've always liked to hang around with people who are smarter than me, and find the kind of people who are sort of willing to have conversations with you. You add enough value to their part of the conversation, and
Right,
not
right.
everything's transactional, but and then sort of two, always be learning, have this sensational, never feel like I just never feel satisfied. And then you combine that with my sort of like 5 decades of working really we talk about DevOps. I'm really sort of the O. I mean, I've coded, I started my career as an IBM mainframe assembler coder, on geophysical systems, right? But I'm mostly the O. And then, and as I look back of, all these phases of technology that I've gone through, the one consistent is that I always gravitate towards the O in DevOps are the people, and I know DevOps hasn't existed for 5 decades for anybody
Right.
who's worrying about that right now. But is that the O, kind of what do we do is at the end of the day we protect the brand.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
the people that worry about, okay, this is great technology. The bad ones try to stop the technology. I've never been one of those type of people. But the good ones look at the technology and say, yeah, this is going to be great, but, and in fact, that's, part of what DevOps was all about was, Agile was moving development so fast,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I saw the other sort of joke I did many years ago was really during that first trend, there's that software, like Mary Poppins wrote Lean Software Development, right? And we were coming out of that, coming into Agile, which was starting into cloud, and things were just getting crazy. And I'd make the joke that ops people are like cicadas. We fall asleep for a little bit, we wake up and we're like, oh my goodness, what's going on now? And we just crawl our way back in to try to help clean up in my mind, how do we protect the brand? So yeah, so it's been it's been really a blessed career, and as I guess you've realized, I don't. Oh my dear friends ask me like, when am I going to retire? I don't really understand that word. So, I just turned 67 about a week ago. So
Great.
I,
Great.
I love doing this stuff. So I think retirement, why would you retire if you just love what you do, so.
True. True. I've met a couple of other folks like you, and who really love technology and really love uh, what they are doing. So yeah, why not continue doing that? And I would before getting into the conversation, I know you briefly told about how you come from, where you come from, but like a personal story or a backstory or a professional story where how you ended up doing what you're doing now. like
Ah,
this
yeah, yeah.
AI driven.
Yeah.
I know you have seen 5 decades of
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
the transition, but now with all this happening, AI, and now talk about this term AI ops. What does that go into your mind, or how did you end up coming here?
Yeah, I think there's two things. There's two ways to thread that question. One, so don't let me forget why I don't say I dislike AI ops, but I hate simple abstractions for very complex problems, right? And I sound like a hypocrite because I'm one of the founders of DevOps, but there's a time and place for it, but then there's a time and place where the word is not useful. All right, but I'll go back to the how do I wind up here? And that is, I think it goes back to the I've always, there are these 10-year people and there are these 5-year people where they see technology affecting, and I have a couple of good 10-year friends. I'm a 5-year person.
Hmm.
It's like, again, just to make it like simple,
Right,
right?
right.
Um, I see technologies much earlier than most people, not all people. And I guess hanging out with really smart people helps me see it quicker. And then I look at the operation, and again, it's just like I think my sort of memory muscle is to always go back to like what are the things of this technology is fascinating. Let me learn it. Let me play with it. Oh,
Hmm.
yeah, that's great. How is it going to help? How can I help my clients and people I work with? And then I really immediately fall into almost at the same time is, okay, wait, there's going to be some things that are going to change. And if you look at like, I mean, I won't take you all the way back, but let's start with Agile because it's a good example where there was a large body of people that were incredibly benefiting from an agile movement, right?
Hmm.
It was
Hmm.
changing how developers, and again, the cicada metaphor is, we were asleep at the wheel, but the organization, there were people that weren't benefiting for that.
Right.
And so that role kind of just sort of I absorbed that role and that became basically DevOps. And
Hmm.
then you sort of cross-section that with cloud coming in, which was, oh my goodness, it's not just DevOps. And in some ways there's an intersection between sort of early sort of agile the sort of the counter resistance to how do you do agile fast if you can't configure things, right? That's
Hmm.
configuration management, things like Chef and Puppet and all that, right? Um, and then there's as you sort of think about that, then there's the how do you sort of smooth that? And then all of a sudden clouds coming in basically at the same time and adds
Right,
a whole
right.
nother layer of complexity, but speed.
Hmm.
I used to joke, and it's not even really a joke, like, a lazy sysadmin, um, if they had to build a server and the server was going to be to get the physical parts of it took 2 weeks, you could play golf a couple of times a week because you could say, hey, we're still waiting on the server. But when
Right,
cloud came along, you get the server in 3 minutes or 2 minutes
right.
or 10 minutes, it doesn't matter. Like you couldn't play golf every day or 3 days a week or 2 days a week, right? And so that was an important sort of convergence. And then, but again, it's the like that is just making one group more
Hmm.
affluent to deliver stuff, but it's adding much more complexity burden on the organization. I have to say brand, and I don't know if everybody connects with that, but to me, that's the ultimate. Like if you're Bank of America, the brand is that's where I keep my money and I'm going to be safe, right? And you don't want
Hmm.
anything tarnishing that to people, I better not go to those guys. They lost a whole lot of money or they were down, right? And so you think about cloud was just another extension of that and again, I think that's my memory muscle becomes very quickly like, what are the things that this is going to cause? And then, in the grand scheme of things that don't matter in the universe, I think I have first use on the phrase shadow AI.
Right, right.
Now, again, I can sort of show you everyone. Again, in the grand scheme of things that really don't matter, but I that was sort of my first aha moment about AI, and that was before agents
Hmm.
was
Hmm.
this is there's some stuff that's going to happen. In fact, the sort of interesting thing now that somebody said to me the other day, and I forget who it was, so I'm just going to claim it for myself, is we had shadow IT in the cloud era, with
Right.
shadow AI, and so starting in the early 2020s, right, 22 post ChatGPT, and now
Hmm.
we kind of have shadow IT version 2.
Okay. Hmm.
Right. Like so again, so to get to where I'm at is I just saw early on in this AI is fantastic and it's and I won't bore you with the first time I saw GPT-3 pre-chat GPT. And I was, oh my goodness, and then I learned about hallucinations and I learned about RAG and, but that at some point I realized, oh my goodness, people are going to be building like whole structures around this stuff for knowledge. And then, that's even before we got into like tasks, automated task calling, automated tasks. And I realized, oh my God, and then, of course, the industry we were all in the same ride together with
Yeah.
sort of things like OWASP top 10, LM top 10s, and prompt injections. So again, that it keeps you busy, and yeah. So I think, that idea that my gravity of what I think about always goes to how is this, I love the tech. I want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Mm-hmm.
usually a practitioner in the tech. Like I don't deliver, I don't, I help people understand how to get there and then how to create some resilience around.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. 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 So now let's get into this aspect of the DevOps itself, right? I think many organizations, they kind of think that they believe that DevOps is done once the
Yeah.
CI/CD pipelines are implemented. But the thing is, the reality is that it is not. It has to. So what is the most common misunderstood concept about DevOps or the
Yeah.
DevOps culture?
Yeah. I think, there's an interesting, somebody had mentioned this to me, actually, Dr. Woods, who's a resilience engineer. And, we talked about, and this is going to sound like a diversion, but I'm going to bring it back in. So I wrote a book about the history of AI called Rebels of Reason.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I purposely didn't want to have an opinion about AI in the book. I mean, I literally like I was like, I'm not gonna. I read like 20 books doing my research on the
Hmm.
history of AI, and everyone had some kind of opinion about it, right? And I thought, who am
Hmm.
I? Who cares what my opinion is? I just wanted to tell a Michael Lewisian style book of the
Hmm.
history of AI, so you can enjoy it, you can learn something. And I got approached by Dr. Woods, who's one of the most premier resilience, adaptive capacity people on the planet, and he wanted to reach out to me because he heard I was writing the book, and I guess he was afraid that I was going to over sensationalize AI and all the things that he's not anti AI. He just like he's very much for me. He worries about people doing things where they might cause other people to die, right?
Right. Right.
And so we had this great conversation, and he challenged me to have something in the book about and here's where I'm getting to the point. He came up with this sort of metaphor that I've used now heavily. It's not an AI winter and an AI spring.
Okay.
And
Hmm.
I would sort of transpose that. It's not an AI technology. It's not a technology winter and a technology spring. It's more like a fluorescence. Because fluorescence, the spring means okay, it goes, and the winter means sort of hibernate or leaves die and trees die, and you're sort of starting over. Where
Hmm.
fluorescence is an energy component where it's still there and it's when it sort of lights up and flashes, right? And so I think so. A longer way to get to the answer to your question. So DevOps is just in a long chain of technology, how some might view as technology springs and winters
Hmm.
that I now sort of look at as like it never goes away. The problems were there. The fluorescence, the energy source was there.
Right.
The
Right.
fluorescence is the part where the hype falls out. And then when the sort of fluorescence is sort of the illumination or whatever sort of dies down, the energy is still there. And we still there's in sort of to extend the metaphor, we've learned a lot. So none of that stuff went away. And then there's another. So this idea that DevOps is dead, right? Platform engineering or DevOps is done. It really is counter to the original idea of DevOps, which Andrew Clay Schaefer, I remember seeing the first presentation that was truly a great DevOps presentation with John Allspar's 10 deploy stay at Flickr. That was recorded. Andrew Clay
Hmm.
Schaefer on the same day gave a presentation called Agile Infrastructure. And he
Hmm.
threw up this caricature. It is the archetype for what DevOps is supposed to mean. There was a group called Dev, and there was a group called Ops, and there was a brick wall in between it. And
Yeah.
we were literally because I was like, oh my God. And I knew
And
Andrew.
they're fighting.
Yeah, well, it was like Dev would throw the software over the wall,
Yeah.
ops would catch it, they'd throw it back and say it doesn't work. And
Doesn't
you know,
work.
and everybody, like in any institution that delivers software at scale, knew like that picture exactly meant they knew that was me, that's me. And and then Damon and Edwards and I started, doing DevOps. We started actually the first DevOps days in the U.S. And we kind of changed that into like, how do you get from the aha to the ka-ching?
Hmm.
And what do you have to do? And you have to break down that wall. But here's the point: is although we started with Dev and Ops, we clearly went into QA. We went so those
Yeah.
ultimately those two things were just the metaphor for different groups that had brick walls in front of them. So
Hmm.
when we talk about like DevOps being dead, or no, the concept of humans working together
Is
and the
there?
idea of a
Yeah.
fluorescence of a technology illumination like
Hmm.
continues. And so when you look at something like DevOps, and I don't disagree that maybe the term DevOps is not useful anymore. I don't know yet. Is the word cloud useful anymore? Is the word computer? When if I go back in time, there was a magazine called Computer World, right?
Yeah.
Um, but um, but but I think that the point is it's about human behavior. It's about learning. It's about continuous improvement. And I know I sound like a poster right now, but I think when I hear things like it's dead, I'm like, what? Human learning or
Yeah.
continuous
Yeah.
improvement is dead, or like, and no, the answer is absolutely not, right? Again, yeah. So
We, we also now see a lot of these, hear a lot of these different terms like platform engineering or
right.
like reliability engineering and AI ops and these other things, right? I think these all originated from the concepts from the original DevOps ideas, right? I think so how do you foresee that? Because I know you've been there in this industry for a while and you have seen even the AI concepts
Yeah, yeah,
evolve from those expert systems, right? What we used to talk.
yeah,
I was still in a college at that time in mid 80s.
yeah, yeah.
And now all these things are coming
Yeah,
together.
yeah, yeah, and
So
I think that is the fluorescence metaphor. I
yeah,
think that
yeah,
really works,
yeah.
right? In that, I did expert. One of my first startups was an expert system. We were doing Prolog, we were doing, all the
Mhm.
stuff in the '80s, and we thought this is incredible. We called it AI.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
called
yeah.
it. We unabashedly back then thought, this is artificial intelligence, right? Like,
Hmm.
and and the history of the term is, I think everybody regrets that it was actually called artificial intelligence in the first place. But um, but no, you're right. And then so I think the one point is sometimes the words are useful, and then there's a question of when they're not useful. So go back to my little concern about AI ops, right?
Hmm.
Um, so when DevSecOps came out, it was
Right, right.
interesting because Shannon Leitz, who is an incredible mentor to me, is one of the best. She is, in my opinion, the best white hat hacker in enterprise. There's a
Hmm.
lot of great white hat hackers out there, but like she would run a 100-person red team in Intuit, right?
Hmm.
She coined DevSecOps. And I
Hmm.
remember going to some really big leaders early on in that movement, right? And we created the first DevSecOps days, and I was the likely candidate because I sort of am credited for starting a lot of momentum in DevOps, right? And I remember talking, so somebody in my sphere who's runs one of the largest entertainment infrastructures in the world, and I mentioned the word DevSec. I said, do you know what DevSec is? And he almost leaped out of his chair, and he didn't know what it was, but he
Hmm.
knew what it meant.
Hmm.
And so I
Hmm.
get in, and then I'd had people in different communities beg me not to use that term. And so I'd get in, I'd give a presentation and I'd say, you know what? I'm going to talk about DevSecOps. And I'll tell you what, hold your questions because at the end of the presentation, I'm going to be on the right-hand side of the room talking about this, further discussion. And anybody who wants to argue about the term, meet me on the left side of the room because I won't be there. In other words, so getting hung up, and again, I think the argument that can be made is the abstraction, the one word or two words, useful for gaining fluorescence, basically. That's
Right,
I never put it.
right.
And if it doesn't create the fluorescence that is the illumination of whatever is needed, then it was the wrong metaphor. And then when is the time to stop using it because it's sort of isolating or hiding the bigger problem? And so this is what I have with AI ops is I think AI ops is too broad. There are too
Yeah,
many discussions to have under the banner. DevOps was a simpler term for a simple problem at a simpler time.
true,
How do
true.
we deliver software?
Yeah,
Mary Poppedick, one of my
yeah.
another favorite person, she'd say, how do you get, how long does it take you to get one line of code to the
Hmm.
system, right? Like that was it, right? That was the question we were trying to solve. Now we got a lot more questions because we're moving from our, sort of a deterministic sort of way to a non-deterministic structure, inference for decision making, the probabilities, the risk, security and risk of just the profiles are just, exponentially increased, right? So I don't know what the right wording is to
True.
make sure that we're all covering the all our bases, if you will. Yeah.
Right. The complete basis. I completely echo your thoughts, right? Because the thing is, like DevOps, like you said, it was like the development on one side and the operations
Right,
on one
right.
side, and it's easier to handle. Now, but with AI ops, I think the word which is being used rapidly by
Hmm.
many people, many organizations, without even knowing what all goes under that,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
something like that, and it kind
That's a
of,
really good point.
yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'll lose
yeah,
the thread. Is
yeah,
that can you explain? I can explain DevOps from the moment I saw Andrew's presentation.
right, right,
Worst case, I could show out the caricature of the person on the left side and the person on the right side, and I could
right.
explain the problem where you got it as clear. I I've not met a person who can give me the clarity of the word AI ops.
True.
That's like, oh yeah, no, that covers everything I'm worried about, and it doesn't, right? So yeah,
And it gets very, very tricky. And it see that is where I think many organizations today, of course, they are also uh, handling a lot of these complex systems, right? Complex distributed systems that they are
right? Oh yeah,
across these hybrid environments and other things. And they have a lot of operational challenges. And we cannot coin all that under this term.
that's right. That's right.
I know
Yeah,
there are some things like I think that is where I want to get into these terms like, okay, observability or
yeah, sure. Yeah,
reliability
yep, yep.
or the system reliance. These have become some major priorities, right? I think for the
That's right.
current organizations, the big organizations. But why do these traditional monitoring approaches are falling short when we talk about these modern architectures? What are the things that we are, I know from your background, I think if you could explain, I think, or give a bit of a sense to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that I overuse this quote, but it's still one of my favorite quotes. The William Gibson quote, like the future's
Mhm.
here, but it's not equally distributed. Well, I mean, if you look at an organization, observability is a good example, but we can talk about reliability, we can talk about AI ops, we can talk about DevOps, we can talk about really cloud. Um, but if I've done a fair amount of these what I call qualitative analysis in an organization. So they bring me in usually somebody on the CIO team recommends me to CIO. I meet with CIO and I say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to spend like a month or 2 months with you. You're going to tell your sort of your VPs or sort of program directors or whatever to let me interview
Mhm.
people. And I spent a couple of months. I did one of the largest asset holding banks in the world a couple of years ago, and it was like 500 people. And I go through the thing, and the thing that I find is you like, and now I'll just but you can sort of put in resilience, DevOps, cloud, agile, whatever you want, but let's just use observability because it's a good example. I'll find there's a distribution, sort of let's just say it's a normal distribution, right? It
Mhm.
like there'll be a small percentage that don't even know what the word observability, like, oh, what does that mean, right?
Right,
There'll be
right.
on the sort of right-hand side of the distribution experts that believe everybody in the corporation is on board with this. They're doing open telemetry. They know all the latest specs. They're having conversations with charity majors. Like at Honeycomb, like and then you got that sort of messy middle who are all over the map,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And like that becomes a transformation problem because if
Mhm.
an organization isn't trying to scale out or normalize, what I would say that like we can now put an abstraction layer on all this, which is the role of a CIO today and really anytime, but more important now, is to sort of create a flattened curve, or maybe flattened curve is right, but a sort of a normalized version of talent and innovation.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get all my, I want to squeeze in my talent
Mm-hmm.
to be on the same page, and I want to be on the same page about how we do innovation. I can't do AI if I've got 5,000 Java developers
Mm-hmm.
and 4,500 think AI is hogwash.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean,
Right.
and then that's the developers and the PMs and all that, right? Like it's just not going to work, and it's never worked when technology is, of course. So observability, Charity Mages like took the terminology, used it in IT. She deserves incredible credit for that. Created an amazing product, but like if everybody in the company doesn't really know what that means,
Mm-hmm.
are we really doing it? And it just because I'm embedding in places, and then I'm through a sort of a scaffolding of grab the data that something like Dynatrace or put it here, put it in a database, then told it, wrote it in a report, and you get it at the end of the month.
Right. Right.
And you had no part of like any of that other than you see some red and green screens
Mm-hmm.
or some pie charts or whatever, like you're like, yeah, yeah, I'm just gonna throw that away until they yell at me, right? Um, and then there's another compounding problem. So that's one of the problems, and that's universal of all technology things. Is like
Mm-hmm.
if it's observability is the thing, let's make sure everybody understands what it is and everybody's
Yeah.
participating in it. But then the other problem with observability is post ChatGPT, I would say it really started with when RAG became, the sort of the vector database became very popular, right? Because you
Right.
go back to like, I forget when, let's just say 2023, there were like three RAG vendors.
Mm-hmm.
Now, ML people have been doing it forever, but like for the general public, and then like within a year, there were 100 vendors doing it, right? And, but the problem became is hallucinations, right? And
Right.
so the ML vendors, that people who like were experts at neural networks and understood this stuff inside out, already had software companies that were doing evaluations,
Mm-hmm.
and they look. All I can guess is they looked over at like how do I sell to the banks and the insurance companies? Oh, they have this thing they call observability. Let's call ours observability.
Mm-hmm.
And therein lies a really complex problem because a lot of people, like, again, nothing against like Honeycomb or Dynatrace or any of the other observability products, they're application and service observability. So
Mm-hmm.
so what happens? You buy Honeycomb because they say, oh, we do LLM observability. Well, they do all this sort of the application service, throughput, latency, and they're getting better. Datadog, but they're not doing the core stuff that things like Galileo, who just got sold to Cisco, and
Right.
Arise. It's a whole different. And now I've had customers tell me they were frustrated because they thought they were getting that when they
Mm-hmm.
bought Dynatrace, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another like there's another complexity of like why observability is sort of a mess right now in terms,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not too dissimilar to, again, if you haven't scaled or sort of shrink the sort of the gap between what your talent gap and your innovation gap, if they're not as close as possible on the same wavelength, if you will, then like things just don't work because that's DevOps, right? I had
Right.
developers that were going incredibly fast and ops
Mm-hmm.
that were not on the same wavelength,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't work.
I think it's a great point that you made. I think the talent gap and the innovation gap, just like how the development and the operations, they
Yeah,
didn't go. And that's how I think if these two do not work together, I think you're not able to solve the problem. It can call X number of terms, but I think we do not get there.
yeah. And the
So,
question then, so sorry, and the question then is,
yeah,
there's at some point maybe you're in the wrong organization, and that's a
yeah,
reality test as well. In other words,
right.
if I'm the CIO and I'm decided we're going innovation, we're going AI, and we're going agency, and that's another whole level of discussion.
Yeah, yeah.
Then like hey, you 5,000 Java developers, are you on board or not on board? Because if you're not on, like I gotta know, because if you're gonna sit there and resist everything and you be passive aggressive, I
Hmm.
can't have you here. And that's a reality check too, right? But like that's the talent, sort of scaling the talent, right? Making sure. I mean, I think, if you've got 5,000 developers and a couple of thousand of them building your architecture and you're a multi-billion dollar corporation, the last thing you should do is be thinking about getting rid of them.
Yeah, yeah,
What you
true.
got to be out there is making sure they're on the same talent innovation wave, and let's go. crazy, right?
Mm,
With
mm.
innovation.
So what is currently happening in this space is that companies want to use AI in this operation space, the operational space, right? I think you want to operate your all this across these different operations. I want to use AI. I think they are loosely, vaguely putting this term AI ops. But from your experience, the real world problems, uh, what AI should be solving in these operational environments versus what might be what they are kind of trying to get ahead of the reality. So what is happening? So what has to be solved in this operational world versus what is getting solved because you are using this whole umbrella term of
Yeah,
AI
yeah,
ops.
yeah.
Uh, could you cut through
Yeah.
that and explain a bit more
I
from your?
I think, another one of my friends and mentors, a guy named Topo Powell, and we worked on some projects together, specifically DevOps automated governance, which is another interesting idea of how that might transform into agentic automated governance. But I remember one time we were sitting at an event, it was a conference, and he just asked a group of us who were sitting around, mostly the speakers, he said, "Got a question for you. Just because you can go fast doesn't mean you should go fast."
Right, right.
And you knew it was Topo because like the guy, was like a physicist because computer science was the first fellow at Capital One, right? Was on the team that invented jar files. So like it wasn't sort of just some arcane somebody who got too many drinks, and it made everybody think, and nobody answered right away. And then so I've heard people use the term just because you can use AI, should you use AI, right?
Mhm.
So I think like there's sort of strength in that sort of thinking process in that I think too many people, and certainly leadership is, why are we not using AI for this? Our
Mhm.
competitors are. Like the rational question is we should be experimenting like crazy. In fact,
Mhm.
I sort of dislike people use, I get call a lot of podcasts and they talk about, to me, they ask me the questions of, the crossing the chasm or the innovation dilemma and all that, right? And I think, and then at the same work, there's a question about, is AI failing, right? The MIT report, all that
Right,
stuff.
right.
And I say, I like to think of things as a J curve. There's a Virginia Satter, okay, the Satter curve of change. And the J curve is interesting because you start off. It's sort of like the trough distribution, but it's a sort of a J, and the J is that that messy middle at the bottom of the J is where you
Right.
learn. It's not failures.
Yeah, that
And
is where
so,
you
like,
learn.
I don't mind if you try to innovate on lots of different critical applications in AI, but what I want you to learn really quick, and as quick as possible, is which ones work, which ones don't work, which ones should be, which ones shouldn't be, or we tried this, it didn't work this way, let's try that way. So I don't look at as sort of laggards or, I look at it as, you know, because this is core to what I totally believe, is you're either a learning organization or you're losing to somebody who is. And that's Andrew Clay Schaefer is my favorite quote of all time. And so the bottom of the J is where that happens.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right. And then the ones that come out, that sort of accelerate out of there are the ones that become successful. So like taking that back to your sort of question, I think that we get sort of stuck in this idea, are we failing or not failing, or are we doing AI ops? And that's the distribution problem. Like yes and no, because it's not equally distributed. Um, and then like, are we really understanding what we're doing is that we're shrinking, we're closing the gap between talent and innovation in our humans, our people, and are we learning? I definitely rant, sorry, you shouldn't have invited me on a podcast. No, but I get really frustrated about all this sort of research about these metrics for AI.
Right, right. Yeah.
And I wrote a newsletter article recently about, like, they're just lines of code. I mean, we went from 30% of our code being written in AI to 60%. Our commits are up 48%. And like, what does that tell me? I have
What
no.
is it?
In fact, we know that there's a lot of AI slop going on. So the question I want to know is, what are you delivering? What are you
What
making
is it?
money? It seems like the whole industry is now tokens. People are like measuring people's productivity about how many tokens they burn. I mean, like, did we not learn anything? in at least the last couple of decades. Um, so again, it all goes back to the same thing. Are we learning? What's our calibration for how well we're learning?
Hmm.
And it could go back to the aha. I don't think everything has got to be transactional like money, but
Right.
the aha to ka-ching, like how fast are you getting from the idea to something that's showing value to whatever your sort of service offering is, whether it's, nonprofit or it's revenue based or it's, whatever, right?
Right, right. I think at end of the day, it ties up to this value, whether it is
That's right.
organizational value, the business value, or whether
That's
it
right.
is
That's right.
nonprofits. I
That's right.
think what is that value you are providing, right? I
That's
think
right.
this is where you have to tie these three different organizations together. I think broadly, if I see the engineering organization, the operations, and then the business teams,
That's right.
these are the
That's right.
three big organizations who kind of engineering. I think you start, you work on these architecture, you build these products, and then operations is that which will keep you smooth and delivering and maintaining the things. And business team is where I think you are kind of getting the business, and you have to align. I see that currently in this rat race of you want to develop everything, you want to embed AI everywhere, enterprises are struggling a bit in getting that alignment between these different
Yeah, no,
organizations. And
there was,
what are your thoughts? How
yeah,
important? I
yeah,
think this is where the
absolutely.
importance of culture
Critical.
is into
Critical.
play, right? I think
Yeah, yeah.
what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, so when I was at, Andrew Cliche mentioned a couple times, he brought a team, a really like it was a crazy at Red Hat. We spent like almost 2 years at Red Hat, and yeah, it was 2 years, yeah,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
or 3 years, no, it was 3 years. And he brought in myself, Kevin Bear, who was co-author of Phoenix Project, and Jay
Hmm.
Bloom, who's one of the smartest guys I've ever met, right? And we worked on a lot of we spent a little time there trying to help Red Hat understand. Like originally they thought, oh, these are the DevOps people, let's bring them in and get some legitimacy in DevOps. But we were already beyond the DevOps thing. We were sort of talking languages of, social technical, and we were bringing out I've written a book about Dr. Demings, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so like a lot more deeper organizational behavior, organizational design. And one of the things we came up with is we call it the five elements. And I was sort of part of it, but like I think Jabe was probably maybe Andrew too. But the idea was, in order to make things work, it wasn't just dev and ops. It was sort of product management. Like think of it as four quadrants with a little sort of intersection in the middle. So on the upper left is sort of product. On the
Hmm.
bottom left, it's development. On the upper right, it's architecture. On the bottom right, it's operations. In the middle
Hmm.
is leadership, all connected.
Hmm.
And it's sort of like, the Chinese medicine balance. That if
Hmm.
you couldn't get the balance, Red Hat didn't really like, they didn't really stick. The things we did there didn't stick, to be politically correct, right? But I thought there was some strong value in this idea of like, how does, sort of Chinese medicine work? It's a balance, right? And so the idea, and I still, I talk to my clients about this stuff, right? And that is, like I think you define a balance engineering or business, but you could run into a trap there because I have people, in the early DevOps days and in the cloud days call me and say, John, can you help me fire my architects? I'm like, no, 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 that's the wrong. These are the people that have gotten you to where you're at. What we need
Right,
to figure out
right.
is sort of how to get that talent and innovation on the same page. And I
Hmm.
think so. The question you run into, it's not just DevOps or Dev or Eng or business, and it is. But we got to also think we have product management, right? And if they're out, like again, everything's bottlenecked. And if architecture's out in a completely different world, and then leadership's got to be connected to all of them in a
Right,
sort of like a
right,
balancing. And so, yeah, I think that's and you could probably expand on that, but that's better than dev and ops.
right.
And because like to make and so when we talk about AI, right? Like we need to make sure we understand what our talent is.
Hmm.
And and the assumption there is that you've got a well-oiled machine where product is the definitive, and I know this is not true, but is the definitive liaison between the business.
Right. Right.
You make this assumption that they're pretty good at making sure they're sort of bringing into the envelope what the business needs, and the good ones, we make fun of product managers, and some people do, I do too, but the
Hmm.
good ones, like are on top.
No,
They're
yeah,
they're connected to what the business needs. They have a great relationship with the business, and
right,
yeah,
right. So now that AI is getting into the here, I think I want to kind of bring up this question. We see AI, the different kinds of AI tools helping engineers write code, analyze these logs, and diagnose these different incidents. Uh, and it is kind of fundamentally changing the role of a software engineer
yeah,
and
yeah.
in the operations teams. How 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 is it going to affect this industry? I think I know you have seen the last 40 to 50 years going through, starting with this basic
Yep.
the
Yeah,
program
I've been through this
microservice.
trend
Yeah,
many times. I think
right.
I fall into the same trap that everybody else does. While we're in it, I start thinking this is different than all the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
It usually is. This time it may not be. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a concept called Jevons paradox. Jevons was an economist who studied coal mining, and the nut of it is the non sort of economic way to describe it is a lot of times we look at these sort of abstractions and we think it's going to reduce consumption.
Mm-hmm.
And turns out it's actually usually the opposite. As we make things easier to use, we make more abundance, more people create abundance, we create more value, and the consumption goes up. And a
Right,
simple example would be, when video stores started, I think most people believed the movie theaters were going to go out of business. It was quite the opposite, right? You started after that having 20 people wanted to go to see more movies, right? And now you had 20 plex movies. And I think we're in that the question now is this time different, and I think that's being a critical thinker. I think one of my
mm-hmm.
concerns is people who are very smart are flippantly when the question comes up is it's going to get rid of developers, is it going to what's the universe for sysadmins or DevOps folks or operators, and the sort of one side of the fence is, oh, Jevons paradox, don't worry about it. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know, man, like every time else it was physical, but so I at least want it, but I tend to sort of like agree. And just to put a finer point, actually yesterday I've been invited to be a board advisor for Auburn University's computer science department. And I met with the professors and the students yesterday, and these are all kids that have primarily spent the last 4 years getting degrees, learning how to code. Now,
Right.
I'm simplifying because Auburn University has an incredible engineering
Yeah,
department, right?
yeah.
And some of their senior projects were off the chart, cool, but I had to sit in front of these kids. They round robin me with a couple of advisors, and I'd get like 15 kids, and they'd ask me questions, and I had to look them in the face and say, I'm not one to. I'm going to be transparent with you. It's going to get messy right now, right? Because the idea, there was another guy who worked for a large corporation, a large bank,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, I don't need a coder. He
Mm-hmm.
said, I got Claude Code, you know, and again, that's a little flippant, but his point is like he's not going to look at these universities and say, "Hey, I want your best coder,"
Mm-hmm.
right? And and so I'm having to look him in the face and say, your world, the world that you thought 4 years ago you were going, and this is the perfect transition because I think any kid starting now is going to be faced with the reality in the freshman year
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that the world, and by the time they graduate, they're going to have to know a lot more things. In fact, that's why one of the reasons they invited me in is to help them understand what they should be, how they direct these kids, right? Maybe get rid of compiler design finally in a computer science degree curriculum. But the, I think that this group is probably the most unique group that's going to hit the streets right
Mm-hmm.
now, right? Imagine you're graduating like this year
Mm-hmm.
in the most confusing time software development has ever been. I'll just tell you another story. When I present, typically if it's sort of a bigger group, I'll have usually a mother will come up to me and say, my son or daughter is in high school. You sound to have a lot of experience. What should I tell them to do? I'd say up to about 3, 4 years ago, I'd say computer science is a good bet if they like math.
Right.
I don't say that right now. I don't feel sort of confident to say that computer science is the right degree right now. Or what I told a lot of kids that were already getting degrees is if you had a backup like finance or marketing, that's not a bad thing to have right now.
Hmm.
Um, so to get to the Jevons paradox is the trick is everything's going to change. I don't, what I hope doesn't happen is organizations don't start getting rid of 4,000 Java developers. What I hope is they sort of get them on the same talent innovation phase and now create way more with more, right?
Hmm.
It's not more with less.
Right.
It should be more with more with more, right? Or what we have. And that's Jevons paradox is like if we thought the 4,000 developers we had were creating sort of a value
Hmm.
and now we can get 10x out of that.
10x value.
Why
Hmm.
would we get rid of them? Like and I mean the numbers even I just read an analyst report the other day where it's like let me pull this up. This is crazy. The where is the a large fintech company created a chat bot for a call center um, that it was all agent based. So it was
Hmm.
agents. They had like about 10 agents that handled complex identity, permissioning, compliance. The bot handled 60% of 60K services, 60,000 calls a day.
Hmm.
The cost per instance, which is a call, was 40
Right.
cents
Hmm.
compared to the human, which was $10.
Mm.
I mean, you can't fight those economics,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so just realize that these are things that just going to come down from the top, right or wrong. Because if you're in a fintech and you're a manager that runs a call center and you hear this story, I want one of those, right? And so then the question then is prepare that it might be different, that you might go through a bump to get hired. I mean, again, I've been through troughs in this industry. There have been times where, fortunately, I've been lucky. I've never been had pro problem finding a job, but I've been in situations where really talented people were struggling to find jobs. I mean, hell, after the sort of the developer advocate thing that happened 5, 6 years ago, right, where companies just started unloading they were literally in criminal behavior for the prior 10 years of just hiring everybody that moved that could pronounce the word advocate and
Hmm.
then decided it wasn't working and got rid of a lot of them, right? And these were really brilliant people, right? So be prepared for that trough, but then you got to sort of navigate your way on like what works, what have you learned, how are you constantly learning? Are you a critical thinker? When I hire
Mm.
people, I don't give a rip what language you know. I don't like I do kind of care about like how you've been prepared for this job. But more important than anything, do you understand first principles? Are you a critical thinker?
Exactly.
Because then I
Hmm.
know that I've defeated most of my problems I'm going to have with an employee because they're
Right.
going to basically figure stuff out.
Right. Beautiful. I think it's great that you brought up this aspect of critical thinking and first principles because that is going to become even more
That's
important
right.
in these
Exactly.
days. And then, of course, like you also mentioned, that you need to understand your domain better, what you're
Yeah,
trying to solve, and then use the tools at hand. And in that way,
that's
I
right.
know there is going to be short-term pain, but I'm pretty
That's right.
sure
Exactly. Yep.
we
Yep.
get
Yep.
through that together. And I see that these kind of you can still apply a lot to these different architectural principles that you use. I
Totally.
think it becomes
Absolutely. Yeah.
even more
Yeah.
important on how you use these to
And,
create these
and
architectural
let's face it,
principles.
if you're navigating properly, it's never been a better time to learn. I mean, my research now is crazy. Like even as
Mm.
I get older, it's a little, I mean, I think I've always been like this. I'm blaming on being older, but even preparing for this podcast with some of the topics, I'm like, I said something about that way back when. I've got some vector databases I just pull up. And I
Okay,
thought, oh
so
yeah, they're here in in 2014, I gave a presentation like the cicada thing, right? Like I was like, what did I say about that? And like it's never been a bad time. So if you have the right mentors, so if you're a young person, this is what I told the kids is, find good mentors.
hmm.
It's never been a better time to learn.
Hmm.
And then just make sure you're not like, Don't listen to people who are telling you just be a better Rust coder, right?
Right,
Because,
right,
listen to people that are trying to tell you that, you need to understand complex architecture. I mean, if you want to go work for a bank, you better understand systems thinking,
right, right.
right? Yeah. And so I think I think we're both on the same page there on that. Yeah.
I think it took a while for me to come to this question. I term this as the extra AI question, the million dollar, billion dollar question, I
Okay.
say. So I keep, irrespective, I think whether it is an organization or an individual uh, that successfully, what differentiates them, whether it's an organization or an individual, to leverage AI so that you are better off, or how do you leverage AI and how do you adapt AI uh, to rather than struggling to adopt it? What,
Yeah.
what's the thoughts that you have?
I think we can go on that, and I think we've covered a lot
Mm,
of that. You need to be a learning organization. You used to have system thinking. You got to understand, one of the things I was going to talk about, and I know we're getting squeezed probably for time, is the whole idea of social technical systems, right? Like that
mhm,
is the human. So the question isn't like the technology changed, it's the combination of the humans as sort of the interaction with the technology. That never changes. It's just the technology part of it changes. So I think you have to understand those principles in the sense that AI is just another form of fluorescence, right?
mm,
Um, and even the LLM model, right? There's a lot of debate is when there's going to be a bend on the sort of LLM architecture or the current whatever you want to call it, the generative AI, right? The and that's going to happen, and it will be bend. We don't know if it's 2 months or 2 years, right? But there'll be bend, but then there'll be another. There LeCun's working on another structure and JEPA. But then, I think the thing so there's a lot there. Like that I think we covered. The thing I do worry about right now is the spread of like I think we're in an echo chamber, and I think there's a high percentage of people that are not in an echo chamber. And
mm.
this echo chamber is around sort of how vulnerable, how smart these models are getting at
Right,
discovering
right.
vulnerabilities. Like everybody's talking about, Mythos right now, right? And
Hmm,
even OpenFOR 6 was
hmm.
pretty darn scary, right? And I saw a presentation. This Nicholas Carlini. He was like the chief vulnerability scientist or whatever they call it at Google, and Anthropic hired him away to work at Anthropic. Now he's like the chief, and he gave a presentation about a month ago, and he said, so this guy was literally the head of vulnerability research at Google
Hmm, hmm.
that said basically OpenFOR 6 is better than he is at finding vulnerabilities. So probably one of the best guys in the world finding vulnerabilities
Exactly.
is basically, and that's before Mythos, right?
Right. Before
So here's the
Mythos, yeah.
question. Like we know this. We're all scared to death. In fact, Anthropic is like according if you read their system card or their red teaming, there's like trying to figure out how do you release this thing? It's so powerful. It's find 30-year
Right.
old vulnerabilities in TCP/IP stacks, right? That no
Hmm.
human has caught. But the question then is, are we in the bubble and 90% or 80% of the rest of the world is not and doesn't know that there's a model that already exists
Hmm.
that all I have to do is point at your company. I don't even have to be a 10-year experienced black hat hacker. I literally can just say, find me the most, interesting or deepest vulnerability at this bank.
Right. Right.
And if the ROI is like, a million tokens or whatever, right? Like like again, the adversaries, like they've been making pretty good money for years sitting in their New York studio in their pajamas making crazy money, right? Like, like I mean, I think they're gonna find the people that aren't in the echo chamber who don't realize they're running legacy software, don't even have the appetite or even the knowledge or to basically refactor everything, or can't even find the talent to refactor thing. And I think the adversaries are going to wreak havoc. I think it's
Right.
going to be
Right.
because right now everybody's talking about this equilibrium between evil and good are being fought. Almost like cops with radar detect, and radar detectors, right? Oh well, as long as I got a radar detector, I'm not going to get a ticket. Well, how about the people who can't afford radar detectors, right? Like, in other words, these people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah. That
And
is giving
yes,
me even more scarier. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
think
mean, it's one thing for an organization like Google or maybe, JP Morgan Chase who can afford to hire the best adversary people, and it's their job to make sure they know all they already had,
what
confidential
is yeah,
meetings with Anthropic about my Mythos, right? But you're some other small mid-sized bank,
you
and you
don't
don't
even
even
know what's
know you
coming.
don't even know
Yeah,
what Mythos is. You hadn't even heard about it, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no. So that's where I think therein lies, a lot of opportunity, a lot of chaos. When there's chaos, there's opportunity, right?
true, true. Great piece of advice. I think I love the way you've answered that question. I know we are a little over the time, but I would want to ask you this last question.
Sure.
I know it's very interesting. I know it's things are moving at a very frantic pace. What excites you the most about the future of AI and its
Yeah, yeah.
role in
I'm glad
these
you asked this. Yeah,
operational systems or
yeah.
these things?
So one consistent thing I mentioned earlier that we created this thing called DevOps Automated Governance. We wrote a paper on it.
Right,
It was really the simple idea was as things were moving so fast, audit was getting so, the toil of like internal audits in large banks and stuff was just ridiculous. Organizations wasting incredible bandwidth for almost 2 months a year, having to ask stupid questions about like the ServiceNow record said you did this. Can you show me the log? What does the log
mm,
mean? How come the log doesn't match this log? Right, that kind of stuff. And so we created this whole idea of like, could we create digitally signed attestations, that immutable digitally signed attestations of things we do in the pipeline? Great.
mhm,
And now there's 5 software companies at least doing it. It's sort of like a standard. And then one of the things through that process, I realized, and I would say to people in my presentation, and we wrote a book called Investments Unlimited. It was like 9 of us, all industry leaders, and it's sort of a fictional story about a bank that almost loses banker's license because they don't understand, and this is the core. They didn't
mhm.
understand the difference between IT sec and IT risk.
Wow.
And they're not the same thing, right? Just because you've got all these products and you're doing SaaS and you're doing DaaS, it doesn't mean that an adversary can't get into a tier one system, right?
True,
And here's the
true.
thing: if you're a regulated industry and that happens, you might get a fine. You might actually get a restricted business where you can't do business in a certain region, or you might
Mhm,
go out of business, and that's happened to a bank.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
so the idea that we had Sneak and we had this and we had that, and I think Sneak's a great product, so I'm not picking on it. Like that's not the answer when you basically get, a regulatory body that gives you, basically what they call a finding or severe enforcement action. So I spent a lot of time really trying to understand that to the point we did a paper, so we did a book, and I worry now that the AI introduced a new plane for risk, right? Like, prompt injection, hallucination.
Right, right.
But now agents.
True.
I've been
Yeah,
tracking this rogue agent thing, like
yeah,
these decisions that agents are making decisions like, why would I go to the load balance? You asked me to go get a list of 100 servers. You thought I was going to go to the load balancer to get it, but you gave me temporary root access, so I'm going to Vault. And that's a true story.
yeah,
So
yeah.
these agents are making decisions that humans wouldn't make, and sometimes figuring out things that humans were like, "Wow, I
Why
never
the
knew that
heck?
was a
Yeah,
parm in GitHub, or Git, right?" Um, so then the question now is, how are we dealing with the inevitable thing that's going to happen, the wrong decision that causes some kind of consequence that gets a regulatory body involved,
right,
and how are we going to explain that we knew, like there's this concept of known knowns, known unknowns, and an unknown you should have known about, right? And at the very least, did you at least put in, there's 3 categories. There's known knowns, there's known, I mean, this in sort of a
right,
compliance regulatory. There's known knowns, and then you're not doing a known knowns, you're going to get a real slap on the hand.
right,
If you a known unknown was, yeah, you kind of knew about it and you hedged the bet.
right,
She thought it was too expensive to deal with that. And now you've been
right,
caught. Fix it now because next time. In that book we wrote, in banking, OCC gives you it's a matter requiring attention. And you get enough of those, you get a matter requiring immediate attention. You ignore
right.
that, and you could go out of business. So a known unknown is, all right, I'm going to give you grace. Here's an MRA. Fix
You
it.
do it.
It
Right.
happens again. Hey. And then there's the sort of unknown unknowns, and that's the ones like, those are the
It's
sort of the,
dangerous. Yeah.
well, and there's the black swans,
Yeah.
and maybe that's too intense. But my point is, having a risk or governance structure means that you're kind of covering all your bases on the known knowns.
Mm-hmm.
You're showing evidence that you were at least able to recognize a known unknown, and you've basically showed that you can fix it. And everything else was within the unknown unknowns are within an accepted risk profile that everybody agreed to.
Or
We're not
you come.
having any
Yeah.
of those conversations now with agents. None, zero. I've talked to some of the biggest leaders in the largest corporations. And you know what they are? You know what the risk discussion is right now? State-of-the-art risk discussion, some of the largest banks I've talked to, is
Mm-hmm.
should we use MCP or CLI? Right? Yeah, that's not going to get
That's
you
not.
a severe and for. Well, we used CLI instead of MCP, and that should never happen. Like the OCC or the any of the regulatory bodies go, well, I don't care, So yeah, that's to me that's the $1 million question right now.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great. The way you put it, the known knowns and known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, which gets, though it's a black swan event, I think it gets very tough. And how do we even use a kill switch, or we understand
Oh yeah, yeah.
ahead
No,
of
these are
time?
things. These are things I want. I built a workshop. I just did
Right. Right.
all things AI. I ran a workshop all day, and that's what we talked about. Is I don't know exactly what the right answer is, but if you're going to agency, you have kill switch, you have escalation policies.
True.
Do
True.
you
And how do
have
we control
sort of
that? Right.
gating? Like if it's a confidential email, why is there more than 10 going out, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I even not go to the point of like getting very technical. I'm working with some people trying to encourage them. So I like to get other people. I'm a sort of Tom Sawyer kind of guy. I get other people to paint my fence, but I think things like eBPF and WASM might be really good containment infrastructures
Mm-hmm.
for agents.
Mm-hmm.
In that there are no permissions, and I can do packet level flow to create task lists. I got one guy in a university that's working on this right now for
Mm-hmm.
intelligent traffic systems, trying to run agents at the edge plane. Right. Anyway, long. I can go on forever, and I do. But yeah, so I'm very excited about literally trying to get people to have these kind of conversations because I don't know all the answers. We didn't know the answers when we started DevOps
True.
Automated Governance
True.
in 2017.
True. A great piece of conversation. I think I really love the conversation, John. Glad that we had this conversation, and
Yeah.
I'm also working some things on this governance, and maybe I'll get you on board some other time, and we'll have a little more
Yeah, we
detailed
need to get
conversation.
more connected on what you're working on and I'm doing. That's one thing
Yep.
about the
Yep.
podcast I meet. Some podcasts are people just dry, and I'm like, I answer their questions and they scratch their head. But you clearly are, you definitely are. You seem like, yeah, I mean, you know what you're doing. Just your questions alone were very sort of intuitive, and so I would love to follow up with you. So you got my calendar. Just
Sure. Thanks, John. Thanks for your
all right.
time. Loved
Thank
it.
you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
John, thank you once again for joining us today on XTraw AI and for sharing your incredible insights, experiences, and perspective on the evolution of DevOps, operational intelligence, and the future of AI-driven engineering. This was truly a fascinating conversation, and I know our audience will walk away with a much deeper appreciation for how AI is reshaping modern enterprise systems. And to everyone listening, thank you for being part of the XTraw AI community. We truly appreciate your support as we continue bringing you raw, unfiltered conversations with some of the brightest minds shaping the future of AI and enterprise innovation. Stay glued to XTraw AI for more exciting episodes, thought-provoking discussions, and deep dives into the technologies transforming our world. Until next time, this is Raghu Banda signing off from XTraw AI. Happy predicting the future with XTraw AI.